Sometimes the best way to understand a really big idea is to just look very, very closely at one single thing. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to dive deep into one of the most iconic paintings ever made to see what it can tell us about history, politics, and philosophy.
So let's start right where you're supposed to start, with that first look. When you first lay eyes on The Death of Socrates, what is it that just grabs you? So this is The Death of Socrates, painted by Jacques-Louis David back in 1787. And look, even if you know absolutely nothing about the story, you feel its power, right? It's undeniable. It's in the sharp clarity of the whole scene, that fierce gesture Socrates is making, and that incredible tension between his hand, which is still teaching, and the hand that's about to take the cup of poison. It's all there. That dramatic light cutting across the room, the soft clothes, the cold, bare stone wall. It's just pure visual theater. Okay, so who is this defiant man, and why in the world is he about to drink poison? To really get the painting, we first have to get the story it's telling, a story that was passed down to us by none other than the philosopher Plato. So here's the historical backdrop. Socrates, the great philosopher of Athens, gets put on trial. And the charges? Well, they were failing to recognize the city's gods and, maybe more seriously, corrupting the youth with his ideas. He was found guilty, and the sentence was death by drinking a poison called hemlock.
Now this is where it gets really dramatic. His friends had it all worked out. They'd arranged an escape. He could have just fled Athens and lived out the rest of his days somewhere else. But he said no. Socrates chose to die, turning his own execution into one last unforgettable lesson for all his followers.
And what was that big lesson? Basically that a true philosopher doesn't fear death. For Socrates, it was an apotheosis. That's the moment the soul is elevated, finally set free from the body. And that's the exact moment David captures here. Socrates is reaching for the poison, not with fear, but with total conviction, still teaching, still pointing up toward whatever comes next.
Now, of course, David's taking some artistic liberties here. Let's be real, the actual Socrates was 70 years old. He probably wasn't this chiseled and handsome. But, see, David isn't trying to paint a portrait of a man. He's painting an ideal, a powerful symbol of moral strength and sticking to your principles no matter what.
And this whole idea of painting an ideal is central to the art style that David basically invented and championed. It's called Neoclassicism, and it was severe, it was moralistic, and it was a total rejection of the art that was popular at the time. You have to understand just how revolutionary David's art was. At the time, the dominant style of the French monarchy was Rococo, which was super ornate, decorative, and honestly kind of frivolous. David's neoclassicism was the polar opposite. It was severe, stripped down, and strong. It drew its inspiration from the clean, powerful forms of ancient Greece and Rome to tell these big moral stories. It's like David developed his own visual language to get these ideas across. He painted the figures who stood for principle, like Socrates and his loyal students, using these strong, angular, almost geometric lines. That was totally intentional. For him, that was the visual code for strength, for reason, and for that stoic calm.
And then, in total contrast, he painted the figures who were overcome by emotion, like his wife who's grieving and being led away, or the guy delivering the poison who can't even look. He paints them using these soft, flowing, curved lines. For David, curves were the shape of passion, of anguish, and what he considered weakness. Reason is all sharp angles. Emotion is all curves.
But this painting wasn't just some art for art's sake statement. It was deeply political. To really feel its full impact, we have to zoom out and look at the year it was unveiled, 1787. This was a moment of incredible tension in France.
This timeline just puts it all in perspective, doesn't it? The American Revolution had just wrapped up a few years before, and when David unveiled this painting, Thomas Jefferson himself was in the audience. And then, just 2 years later, the French Revolution would ignite. I mean, the air was just thick with talk of democracy and fighting for your principles. So you can just imagine what the French public saw when they looked at this. The message was impossible to miss. Here's a story about a great man choosing to die for his beliefs rather than cave to an unjust government. It was basically a rallying cry against the corruption they saw in their own monarchy.
And yeah, this was no happy accident. The painting was actually commissioned by a couple of well-known radical political reformers. It was designed from the ground up to be a political statement, and boy, did it work. It was a massive hit. The public absolutely loved it because it captured the revolutionary spirit that was brewing all around them.
But David embedded an even deeper, more subtle message in this painting. And to find it,
we have to look a little closer at the ways he decided to change the historical record.
So first, check out the number of followers gathered around Socrates. The historical accounts say there were more than 15 people there. David deliberately paints exactly 12. Now, does that number sound familiar? It should. It's a direct visual echo of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, which basically elevates Socrates to this almost Christ-like figure. That Last Supper connection is fascinating for sure, but it's not even the most significant change David made to the story. Nope, there's another, much bigger departure from history hiding in plain sight.
Take a look at the foot of the bed. See that old man sitting there? He's the only one whose back is to us. He's totally unengaged with all the drama, just kind of lost in his own world. That figure is Plato, Socrates' most famous student, the man who wrote down pretty much everything we know about him. And here's the bombshell. Plato wasn't there. In his own writings, he specifically says he was sick that day and couldn't make it. So why on earth would David deliberately put Plato in a place where he famously wasn't? Because that one simple choice changes everything. It tells us that this painting isn't a photograph of what happened. The entire scene, it's an idea. It's an idealized memory, literally exploding from the mind of Plato. This isn't history as it happened, it's the story of history. And if you need one final clue, David gives it to us. He actually signs his name on the painting twice. Once on the block of stone under Crito, the student who's desperately grabbing Socrates' leg, as if David is saying, I too strive for this strength. But he signs it a second time, right next to Plato. David is identifying himself with the storyteller, the creator of this powerful idealized image.
And there's something so self-aware about that, this idea that this beautiful, noble scene is a construction. It's almost prophetic, really, because just a few years later, the noble, idealized principles of the French Revolution would themselves be betrayed by the brutal reality of the terror that followed.
And that's really the final lingering question that David leaves us with. He shows us that this heroic image isn't reality, it's a memory, carefully built for a purpose. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of our own history is basically the same thing, an idealized memory, painstakingly arranged to serve the needs of right now?